I'm going to go through this very, very quickly. Surprisingly, I'm not going to talk about our projects, but more about process. I'm the co-founder of Architecture for Humanity. We're a nonprofit organization that provides architectural design and construction services for communities around the world. And it was kind of started because of an accident. We've now been running for about 10 years. I co-founded this with my partner almost right out of college. What I mean right out of, I actually was working on homeless issues in New York while studying my master's degree. And what I realized midway through my master's is that my work had got so entrenched in social issues that I was learning more from the homeless community on the streets of New York than I was from my professors in academia. And a moment of epiphany in a winter in Manhattan, I suddenly realized that the money that I was spending for my education was best served on the streets of New York, at which point I didn't go back. So I did complete my 4-year, but I didn't go back. And I will talk about architecture because it's an arduous profession. You do 6 to 7 years of education, then you do what is now somewhere between 3 to 6 years of internship, which is a very convoluted process, only to find out that it's going to be another 10 years before you actually get to be the architect. So, it's a 20-year commitment to actually get to see anything built. What's fascinating about Architecture for Humanity is because we're focusing on the 90% of the people in the world who do not normally get architectural services. You can be a 23-year-old young designer in the middle of rural Cambodia and have the most educated architectural background than anyone in the region. So, we've had designers very young get their stuff built decades before they would do it in the normal profession. So we're a traditional nonprofit. Like I said, we started really out of the frustration I had in the industry. I worked in New York as an architect and started this really as a way to get me to do some social issues and to feel good about the work I was doing. And by accident, just going out there and building a website and building a platform for architects to find an alternate career, it blossomed into a huge organization. As a result, we're pretty global. And that only happened because I was a computer geek when I was a kid, and I was fascinated with how networks were created. And this, for me, it really represents the growth of our organization as we've gone from one person and a laptop to close to 6,000 professionals in 100 countries working. And the idea was, how do you run an organization? How do you re-educate and retrain an industry globally? And the only way to do that is not by having a centralized system, but having eventually a network system where not only are we teaching about how to build in the world, but we're teaching about cultural sustainability. So the idea of what happens in one part of Ghana is very different than what happens in one part of Senegal, not only by topography, by religion, by material usage, but construction technology. And sharing that means that the Harvard student may not have the resources necessary to build in Senegal, but the untrained builder in Senegal knows all the kind of implicit cultural sustainability of working there. And marrying those two together can create some pretty spectacular buildings. We also have chapters in 72 cities around the world that each focus on local issues. This is completely renegade-based. I never intended to start this. They just started under the umbrella of Architecture for Humanity. So my job title is not CEO. It's actually, well, it is CEO, but it's Chief Eternal Optimist as opposed to. And our projects range from urban acupuncture, which is working with people who live in 18 inches between buildings in Dhaka and Bangladesh, and helping build security with $250 housing, to retraining homeless communities in kitchens in London, rebuilding after Hurricane Katrina. And I will talk about open source because we're a huge proponent of Creative Commons as a mechanism to share innovative ideas. And as a result, we built probably 20 prototype housing, but the details put into the Creative Commons helped upgrade and restore about 700 homes. And so it was part of the instigation of rebuilding about 85% of East Biloxi. And I have no time for that, but I certainly can talk about how that system was put in place. We're doing net positive buildings in Kenya that collect all the rainwater and produce all the energy for nearby schools. We bought a company from this guy called Vinod Khosla, who works down in the south of the Bay. And he had been developing a kind of clean tech company that went wrong. And most people see failure as the end of a project. We stay at the start of the project. So we bought the company from him for $1. We took all of his IP and put it into the public domain the next day, which might have irked him a little bit. And then we created a new cement block that uses agricultural aggregate. So that means that you can use straw bale and rice bale. We've got a skateboard park we just opened up in Kabul, Afghanistan. Upgrading community centers and so forth. So you can see in the two projects that are getting a lot of attention right now is we're building 20 youth facilities for the legacy program for the FIFA World Cup. And for those residents of San Francisco, you've been seeing the emergence of the 60-foot, 100% recycled plastic catamaran known as the Plastiki that will sail from San Francisco to Sydney in a few months. So a full range of projects, and these are really, in the heart of that are these designers. And these designers are very interesting because they're mid-career professionals or young professionals who've got agitated in the industry. They've suddenly realized that they don't want to design the next great museum. They want to do something that impacts change. And when you do studies of students entering university in the architectural profession, more than 72% of them want to make positive change in the environment and the living standards of their community. What happens is by the end of it, they want to build Pulitzer Prize-winning museums. So what is happening in the education system where people want to improve their cities and they want to leave by being the signature architect? What was profound for me is I was one of those architects, and I really thought I was the only one out there. And by launching a network, we found that there were thousands of them, and we literally have dozens of people that come into our office without resume. They've flown in from different parts of the country, and they've said, I'm just sick of it. I need to do something that makes a difference, and I need to be here. And so we have something called the Design Orphanage, which is a small work area for recovering architects. But we put them out in the field, and something magical happens because you connect local architects with international architects, and you create this hybrid form of architecture, which is really about creating innovative solutions on the ground up. You can see our statistics. We're across the line, 50% developed, 50% developed, primarily licensed, which is a surprise, and overwhelmingly female. These are all the different groups we work with. They really range from USAID to small community federations. And we realized that more than 60% of our buildings are actually learning environments, that most of the work we do, this kind of urban acupuncture, or the rural acupuncture projects, are about building facilities that re-educate or help educate communities. In the daytime, they may educate K through 12, but at night, they're vocational training facilities. We're working in an area where sustainability really is a matter of survival. So every building is open 24 hours if it's a public building. There's a lot of ways we work, but I'm really just going to focus on two. Most importantly, open innovation, about how you can create a platform to not only retrain a profession towards specific goals, but also to share ideas to advance an industry. This happened, as Tara mentioned, frustrated in my early 30s with the lack of impact we had made as an organization. A lot of magazines were calling us like the great big changer of the world. And when I was looking at the number of people we'd actually impacted, it was kind of a big stretch. When you're like, there are 4 billion people and we'd only done, 500,000. There's a big disconnect between changing the world. So how do we do that? Well, if your focus is social change, not financial gain, you don't own it. You should just give it away. So part of innovation is sharing. And we did that because we realized 1 billion people are living at the bottom of the pyramid. There's 2 billion people in the next 10 years that are going to get electricity. That is really important because we're talking about energy crisis now. In 10 years, most of the people are going to turn on power are either going to turn on in a traditional way or in a renewable energy system way. So we need to build facilities that accommodate for that. 4 billion people is when you talk to the 4 billion people, they consider themselves emerging middle class. No one calls themselves poor. Their neighbor's poor. They're not poor. Their kids are educated. The neighbor's kids are not educated. This aspirational life that you have as you're going up is the emerging middle class. But at the same time, 1 in 7 people are in slums, informal settlements. What's scary about this is we're having a massive population boom, and it's not in Sausalito, California, I can tell you. It's in Lagos, it's in Cape Town, it's in Mumbai. And if we do nothing about the housing industry and about rebuilding the housing stock, 1 in 3 people on the planet will live like this. So it was nice to follow Carol, because we're talking about how a city advances. I'm trying to stop cities from slipping into not only decay and despair, but of course issues of security. And then we're going to double the number of structures on the planet. So here we are. This is the problem with the architectural profession. After 12 years of finally getting to be the architect, this is how you build a building. There's a developer, there's an architect, and there's a builder. Now, the developer can be corporations, foundations, individuals, investment groups, governments, and even universities. Now, they hire an architect to go and build their dream. Then typically now they go and select their own builder or contractor to realize that dream. Now the architect has to talk to the builder and relay information back to the developer. As you can see, there's dollar signs are appearing. Costs a little more money, and then they discuss what's wrong with the building, how to upgrade it. We've had a change in curriculum. We need to add a new building because neurosciences now wants to be separated, and so forth. And then we start arguing with the builders because our dream is now being compromised by the realities of the budget. And so, the upfront costs are elevating. We're reassuring the developer, don't worry, on the back end, you'll be fine because, we'll sort these issues out. And that costs a little more money. Now there's confusion because now the client's not sure whether to trust the architect or the developer. Then there becomes schism between the developer, between the builder and the architect. Now the developer doesn't trust anyone, and there's a lot of cash flowing out of their bank. Then they build this, right? And the problem with this is this started off as $600 million, which is $200 million over budget, and is worthless right now. Here's the kicker: this is only 5% of the architecture on the planet, right? So we're training 90% of the world's architects for 5% of the buildings. Now, if you're somebody who wants to make money and you can be heartless, wouldn't you want to have 95% of the world's buildings as your client? Because what's happening right now is you have the occupant and the builder. And it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're in India or China, a builder with limited skills will build a basic structure. And it doesn't matter what site you're at, whether you're on a hillside, whether you're in low-lying land, whether you're in a hazard zone, they'll just build the same building over and over again because it's more efficient. So we asked this question originally, how to retrain architects? And the question began to morph as, maybe an architect isn't really an architect. What is an architect? And when I was working in the slums of Mumbai, I would find people that had so much more innovative ideas about how they wanted to house their families than the graduate student who had just learned about Le Corbusier's understanding of multidimensional living. So we said, okay, what if you gave builders a resource, not just one architect, but thousands of architects around the world that were focused on these specific issues, and start a dialogue about improving the building standards on a local level. And there was a feedback loop between the architects, but also between the builders, so they could pull these ideas together, throwing all of these ideas in the Creative Commons. Well, we built it. It took us about 6 months to build. We put it out there. The best thing to do when you have an idea is you put it out there and you see all the critics come out and say what's wrong with it, and then you can fix it. What was remarkable is that architects and builders and NGOs started to download all these plans and replicate buildings from this network. It's been running about 30 months. We now have about 4,200 projects on the network from around the world. Now, it took me 10 years to run an organization that's only done about 280 projects. So, in a quarter of the time, there's 10 times the projects, with 20,000 construction professionals involved in it, and we run competitions based around social issues. And why that's important is when you're tackling a systemic issue, you can use the kind of open, collaborative competition form to generate many ideas that can be implemented around the world. These are just some of the ideas that came from this. This is housing in Canada with a very basic open source system. You can drop the energy usage of post-war housing in Canada by 80%. You just download it. You can update your house. It's very simple. This is a camel clinic. You have a doctor in a village, and he's treating patients. And while he's treating the patients, the camel's just sitting there. And at the end of the week, they wrap the fabric clinic up and they put it on the camel. And they hit the camel on the behind, and the camel walks to the next village. And by the time it gets to the next village, it generates enough energy to run the clinic in the next village, right? So what's amazing about this is not only is it a great idea, it works. You can see it was built. What's even better is it was designed by a 19 and a 20-year-old student from an art college in Pasadena, right? So, you know, no architectural education, just a crazy idea, and a faculty that said, look, we're not willing to see this idea just put on paper. You know, what's it going to cost us just to build a prototype and work with some doctors in northern Kenya and redevelop this, open source it, and allow them to adapt it to their needs? So, you know, this is operational, and, you know, there's, you know, now a 22-year-old art student who has a physical object that's impacting the community. Doing a lot of work on the Native American reservations using straw bale and so forth, so innovative technologies because of constraints to resources. Schools in South Africa, Peru, even our projects, all of our projects are up there, so it's all transparent. Any funder, any community member can go in there. And on the back end of the system, it's a project management tool. Just as a point, our FedEx bills dropped 95% just because of the system. So in terms of efficiency, you know, there's that. So every 2 years, we run something called the Open Architecture Challenge. And in January this year, we launched something around K-12 education. I know it's not college, but what was interesting about it is by putting out one mandate is that the design teams had to go into a school and work with real students and real teachers. Otherwise, you couldn't enter. And so it was about very site-specific issues. And how we stumbled across this was we were rebuilding a lot on the Gulf Coast, all across Mississippi and all across Louisiana. And a number of our residents had their health issues exacerbated while living in FEMA trailers, and a number of them died. And naturally, we were angry, you know. I mean, I'm British, and even I was angry. You know, it's not often we show emotion. And, you know, this photo is a great photo for me, because this is thousands of FEMA trailers that never got to the Gulf Coast. The reason for that is the chemicals in the FEMA trailers actually are cancer-causing. So, you know, it's like, sorry you lost your home, now here's a box you can live in that causes cancer. So, you know, as a government response, I was obviously shocked by this, and I began to research the manufacturers of these boxes. And what I stumbled across during a site visit to a school in Mississippi, this group said, we're so excited, we built a new school, it's opening in Mississippi, it was only $800,000. And when I got there, it was only portable trailers. Right? And I said, well, this is the temporary buildings. They're like, no, this is the completed school. It's done. Kids are in. We're ready to go. And I was like, there is something wrong here, you know. And as we began to study the issues around portable classrooms, we realized it was the same manufacturers, and the same materials that are in portable classrooms are the same that were in FEMA trailers. And it turns out that these are all studies done in the 90s and about the health risks. And that top chart, that little one at the corner, that's the cancer threshold chart. And that one is what they were found in portable trailers for kids. So, you know, if you want kids to go to university, try not giving them cancer. So this is my child, so I've become acutely aware of the need for education, and I would like her to learn about cancer, not being diagnosed with it. It's just a basic threshold of education that I think that every parent in America should attain, because there are 6 million kids in the United States currently being taught in that. So as we were researching this, we tried to get funding to redesign the portable classroom around America. We couldn't find funding anywhere. And we looked for about 6 months. And as we were looking, we began to look at our other facilities around the world. And we realized that other facilities had real major issues. And that the Millennium Development Goals said that for universal primary school education, we have to build 10 million classrooms in the next 5 years. It's about $80 billion worth of construction. Coupled with that, we have to repair about another 10 million classrooms. So if you want kids to getting into college, you need schools for them to go to first. So interestingly enough, we've created this coalition of the willing. We took a page out of the the Iraq War about how you get people on board for something, which is you invite everybody as a coalition, and eventually one of them will fund it. Unfortunately enough, the funding came from India and Singapore. And they said, we really want to focus on Asian issues. And I pleaded with them. I said, look, if you put a little bit more money, we can help in the West. And so they said, okay, we'll put in a little more money and we can expand this issue to the United States and Europe. So, you know, the first time ever, we're pulling in funding from the developing world to help the developed world. So that's a change. And you'll know a couple of people like DGREE and Global Nomads. So you'd partner with your local school or one of the three. There was an open source curriculum. How do we get architecture taught into the classrooms? Working with DGREE so that you can identify subjects in which this project could be taught in. And this was done all over the world. We had, working with Global Nomads, we had experts from around the world partner with classrooms, and they could have one-on-one dialogues with the people.
In your schools, how much does culture play an impact in how you design the schools and what you include into the design? Thank you.
Well, if it's a good building, it will be an expression of the community in which it lives. You know, your school will be very different than a school. We've done a bunch of schools in squatter communities in Mexico.
So what's interesting about that is we had a lot of Canadian schools using this. And as a result of this, there was approximately 10,000 people that got involved in this project over this first semester of last year. There were more students in Canada who entered this competition than professional architects. And they also achieved better than any of the professional architects in Canada. So what happens when you just give students the tools to become the professional, which is interesting. So, you know, we had 1,000 teams, and we had to figure out which one would be the best design. When we run these competitions, you don't win a prize, you win the money to build the facility. So that was the main aim, that you would win $5,000 and $50,000 would go towards the construction of a classroom or school. 3 rounds of jurying. We had 40 members on the jury from around the world that all did it online through the network. We had a physical jury, and this is the most important point I want to make about our work. The more online that you are, the more inline you have to be, which means the more digital that you're delivering content, the more digital that you're training people, you have to physically meet. It's almost like I don't know what the studies are, I'm not a scientist, but we found that when we do projects that are just virtual, they fall to bits. When we do projects that are very insular and in a box, they become very conservative and constrained. But the more that you bring in technology and resources from outside and a very open kind of education and shared experience, and then you have a physical meeting that you actually work on the ground. So all of our architects live and work in the villages that we build the buildings, but they're working globally. It creates for a much more robust and innovative solution. And then, of course, the final design review was done by children and teachers because they're the ones who are using the facility, which is like, everyone's like, this is a crazy idea. You've got kids and teachers designing buildings, and then you've got them judging them. And I was like, yeah, they're the end user. Like, they use the building. Like, what is so crazy about this? So these designs, this is from Uganda. This is in New York City. This is retrofitting a building. This is a charter school that's in one building with 4 schools. And they worked with Gensler to basically green their entire school. This is in Chicago and Wisconsin. This is working with Northwestern that have a program out in Wisconsin to bring kids into the natural environment. What was cool about this is these pods would be in the inner city schools in Chicago, and the design will be replicated out in the field, so there'll be kind of this aesthetic connection between urban and rural through the architecture, but there'll be kind of different curriculum. So you take your box from one and into the other. This is in Bogota. This is safe space for children that live in a place where there's drug dealing and gunfights on a daily basis. So the idea of play as a space of education. The green classroom of the future, the portable classroom of the future. And now we're talking with DeKalb County about replacing 400 of their portables. We're building schools in Uganda with this one, with Building Tomorrow. They're going to replicate about 30 schools this year with that. And then 60 schools have been identified for upgrading by this design by IDEO by Orient Global, which were the funder on the project. And we just met with them this week, and they're going to expand that to 200 schools. So this was a project that cost about $150,000 to run. 10,000 people were involved, 400 ideas that were designed, and at least a dozen are being implemented in the next 12 months. This is the final design that won from rural Idaho. We're raising the money to get this classroom built. 90 kids are being taught in a 2-bedroom house in Victor, Idaho. Right? So when we talk about poverty, the face of poverty is not some CNN camera from the Ivory Coast. It's Victor, Idaho. Right? It's like the places that we say are the strong points in the world. There's actually deep poverty and deep chasms of poverty where people are not getting basic education.
Open goal as teachers at this school.
This is what's so amazing about this. I have no time to show this. These are all on YouTube if you want to see them. But in the design process, the kids and the teachers got so involved in the design that they actually produced videos on YouTube, uploaded them to YouTube as part of their entry. So they used all forms of media to get us why this was important. And nothing kills you like a whole bunch of kids talking about why that part of the design that they designed was important to them and their kids. And there's a part in the video where one of the kids is like talking about the new school that she'll be going to, and she says, I've been going to this school for 4 years of my life. It's been a big chunk of my life, and I'm very scared about going into something new. But I think it's worth it because it's going to help the kids behind me. So it's like, wow, she's 8, right? So, it's like saying, I've worked 20 years in this university, and it's a big moment for me. We're developing a green school guide for charter schools that NCB Capital is funding, and there's going to be an exhibit in San Francisco at the Spur in the next few weeks. And then we developed an upgrading program for about 500,000 students that we're kind of shopping around. And then there was an independent documentary produced out of this, half an hour, shown on US television by After Ed, so if you guys know that. Anyway. That's it. That's just one project we did in the last 6 months that's focused around education, and thank you so much.